Hello, and welcome to Introducing Me. I'm your host, Sarah. I started this podcast to get to know other people and lifestyles while discovering more about myself. Each episode, I will give a new guest a chance to discuss their background, culture, interests, or whatever they want to talk about to help increase all of our own worldviews. Today, I would like to introduce you to Jason. He is a former stay at home father who lost his 15-year-old son unexpectedly. Since then, he's created his blog, Letters to Zachary, to share his grief and be an emotional advocate. So, Jason is here today to talk about his journey in parenthood, his journey in grief, and all of those sort of things. So, thank you so much for being here, Jason. Why don't you go ahead and tell the audience a little bit more about yourself?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm a father of two special needs children with many mental and physical disabilities. Both of my kids were born nonverbal. They were born with severe neurological delays, meaning my daughter is 16 and my son was 15. They both functioned about 4 to 6 years old. Uh, Basically their entire lives, or they continue to function that way as for my daughter. Outside of the nonverbal and the developmental delays, both of them had epilepsy. Of the 6 different kinds of seizures out there, I've seen 4 of them in my house. And then on top of that, my son was born with a rare condition called Eagle Barrett syndrome, or more affectionately known as prune belly. The easiest way to describe that without getting into a long, drawn out explanation of it is it's 1 in 40,000 births. We had no idea that it was coming around until the day he was born. Um, Science does not know what officially causes it. They know it's related to a kidney issue, which my son was born with one kidney that did sustain some damage while in utero. But outside of the kidney issues kind of causing it, the main characteristics of Eagle Barrett syndrome is he had a bladder that was abnormally large that had to be given a catheter at least early on in his life every 4 hours. Whereas you and I would get the feeling to go to the bathroom, he didn't necessarily get that. So I had to physically drain his bladder. Otherwise, if I didn't, one, he would get too full and it would be almost a hospital trip, or because of all that fluid being in your bladder, that's kind of what causes urinary tract infections because the sediment in that fluid just settles and that's what gets infected. So he had an abnormally large bladder that had to be given a catheter. The main characteristic of it is he had no abdominal muscles, like none. So those of us that do have it, that go to the gym and try to work out to get the 6 pack abs and the side abs, he had none of that. Like I could lay him on his back, and the only thing between his organs and the outside world would be the skin and the fascia that holds the skin together. I could literally look at his stomach and I could touch his large intestine, his small intestine. I could touch his liver, his kidney. I mean, I could like flip them around and I could point out literally from the outside. That was how well you could see it. It was almost like high school biology class, like dummy that you look at that you go over. On top of that, he had a normal lung capacity, but the issue that we ran in with him was when you and I get a respiratory related virus, we have that kind of base or foundation from that muscle to be able to really get pressure to build up just to cough it out. Well, because he didn't have that base there, he had a hard time coughing it out. And if I didn't catch it fast enough, I ultimately took him to the ER. We were admitted that night and we stayed anywhere from 7 to 10 days every time that happened. And so from the bladder to his lungs, all of that is the Eagle Barrett syndrome unto itself. It's not related to any of his other issues. It's by itself. Again, we had no idea that he was going to have this condition until he was born. So that's with his sister having all the same issues except for the rare condition. That was the first 2, 3 years of my wife and I's marriage. was we had our son, we had all these medical issues, we waited about a year, we had our daughter, and about 6 months after she was born, we found out about all of her issues. So that's kind of what started the first 3 years of our marriage.
Got right off to the bat with learning lots of new things.
Certainly.
And so it sounds like you didn't really have much of a forewarning before either of your kids were born. Did you have any sort of experience with any of these medical conditions or like know of anyone that you would have some correlation you could relate to? Or was it all kind of like completely blind, had no idea what you were going to be put up against?
It was honestly in the beginning, especially the first about 5 or 6 years, it was fly by the seat of my pants, learn everything I could, trial and error. Now, the conditions like the neurological delays and the epilepsy and the nonverbal, those are all really common condition. There's a ton of information out there on it. And so that was a little more easier to research, if you will. It was the Eagle-Barrett syndrome that was a rare condition that luckily I actually found a national group that dealt with it, that had people from all over the country, that had kids and adults in varying ages that all had it. So that really helped out. But the hard part about it was learning like the characteristics of it, how they would react, how things happen, what triggers are, especially with like the epilepsy, because we didn't really know my son had epilepsy until probably after about his first year. One day I was playing with him and he went into a full blown grand mal seizure, which is what when you say seizures, that's what everybody thinks of. It's the rigid arms and legs and the jerkiness and the like shaking and not being able to get his attention kind of thing. And so for that first 5 or 6 years, it was a lot of frustration because as soon as I would learn one thing, something new would come up. And so I would have to constantly kind of catch up.
And so then were you originally planning to be a stay-at-home dad when you first had your son, or was this kind of a result of his conditions?
Well, as kind of a side note, I have been told all my life that I work well with kids. And up until we had my son, I was teaching elementary school physical education. So that was kind of in my wheelhouse. And when my wife and I initially talked before we got married about having kids and things like that, it was always kind of decided if one of us was going to stay at home, it was going to be me. And so, when we had our son, I actually taught the first 2 years of his life. And then it just got to a point where we were in and out of the hospital so much that unfortunately that last year, in the middle of a year, I had to resign because I was essentially working for free because I was out so much.
Now, because you worked in elementary physical education, I'm really curious to know, like, what just that was like, because phys ed, people love it or hate it, and then elementary school.
Well, I got into that one because I always liked games and sports, and I was never good enough to be like an athlete to the point as some of these kids are today, like wanting to go into pro sports, that thing. But, I told people, I said, one of the reasons why I enjoyed working with kindergarten, first and second grade is because a lot of times I probably think like them. And so I had kind of an understanding. And then, you know, I got to a point with them and my son where I could learn to read body language and I could learn to see, I could tell what kids could handle and what they couldn't handle in all grade levels. The higher up you got in grades, the more advanced skill games they want to get. And honestly, even though nowadays dodgeball is almost a banned word, make no bones about it. Kids in third, fourth, and fifth grade want to play every variation of a dodgeball style game you can find. And so, but they would like it because I would always tell them, my first job is your teacher. But if I feel like I can get out there and participate with you And I knew in the back of my head, if I got out there, they would participate even more, which was the goal in the back of my head. I said, if I feel like I can get out there and participate with you, I will. And I did pretty frequently. And so that got them motivated to do whatever we were doing in there, especially when it was a competitive style game or a tag style game, because they always wanted to tag the teacher out. So, yeah.
Of course. So then what was the transition like to becoming a stay-at-home dad, since you were, kind of having to be out of school so often, with doctors and ER visits? What was that transition like to then, like, you weren't even going back to the school?
Honestly, leaving the school system wasn't that hard. I'm one of those people that when I make a decision, I go with it. I just don't look back. And so I'll never forget it. It was the first week of January 2011. And a lot of stress was going on in the house just because of medical issues and back and forth to the hospital. And so about the middle of that week, I called my wife from my office at the school I was at, and I said, what are your thoughts about me resigning and being a stay-at-home parent? And she pauses for a minute and goes, well, if we wait till we're ready for it, we'll never be ready for it. So it's one of those things that we got to kind of rip the Band-Aid off and just do it. And so I said, I think I'm ready to do it. I said, are you going to be okay with, say, being the breadwinner of the family? And I mean, she did very well in the industry she was in. So that wasn't necessarily an issue. And so I said, okay. I said, well, Friday I'll resign. Well, Friday morning, my principal was not in her office, and I shouldn't have done it this way. And I can laugh about it now, but in the moment, I was diagnosed 2 years ago with ADD, and that explains a lot over the last 47 years of my life. And so, but in the moment when I get focused, I get laser focused. And so I literally took a blank white sheet of paper, took a black Sharpie, wrote, Dear the principal, I said, I decided to turn in my resignation effective immediately today. And I put the date and the time, put it on her desk, folded it, put it on her desk. And so I go back to teaching the rest of that day. And literally at the end of the day, because I'm way at the other end of the building, I always had a radio on me. And I hear Mr. Tuttle, and I went, yes, ma'am. Can you please come to the office? And I said, and what's this regarding? And all I heard was, you know what this is regarding. And so I went into the office and I said, are you surprised? She said, I'm not really surprised, but I'm kind of surprised at the speed in which you've done it. Like, do you need next week to, kind of get that? I said, no. I said, I will have everything out of my office and I will be in my truck driving away from this building before you leave out of your office today. And so I made sure that when I drove by her office, I looked in her window. She was still sitting at her desk doing work as I drove out. And so that part wasn't, now that first month where I didn't get a paycheck on my end, I did have a moment where I went, oh Lord, what have I done? But then once I kind of, because I do the finances around here and all that, because even though my wife may make more than me, she'd rather I do all the, paying all the bills, all that kind of stuff. And even she'll come over to me and go, do we have money to do this? Yeah, you can do that. That's fine. And so once I got adjusted to kind of readjusting finances and things like that, everything was fine. The most difficult part was just the hospital stays and figuring out what's going on and what our next steps are and kind of the medical side of things.
And so what, outside of hospital visits, what, in maybe those early years or maybe even now, what is kind of like a day to day of being a stay-at-home dad for you?
Well, right now I'm actually back in education in a different role, but as a stay-at-home parent, um, despite what people think, it's not sitting at home doing nothing all day, and that's just me saying the side of stay-at-home parenting that's not medically related. Now, would I say that every moment of every day was full? No. However, what I will say, when I was busy, I was extremely busy. So I typically went in spurts where I was really busy, then I'd kind of slow down a little bit and get really busy. But like a normal day when I was a stay-at-home parent would be, I'd get up about 6. I'd get kind of my day going. I'd help my wife get her day going. I'd get the kids up at 6. When my son was around, I would get my son up and daughter up at about 6:30. Because neither of them walked, I'd have to carry them into the living room. I'd get them changed out of their sleepwear to what they're wearing for the day. I'd get them changed. I'd get them medicated. I'd get them everything going, get all their bags ready, get everything put on their wheelchairs, get them sitting dressed in their wheelchairs facing the front door, because like we had a lift bus that actually stopped at the front of my house. So I'd get them ready. So the moment that I saw the bus turning the corner, I could get them out the front door and up to the sidewalk to get them ready to get on the bus. They'd get on the bus, they'd go to school. From the point that they went to school till they got home, I was doing all sorts of housework, your typical, cleaning the kitchen, doing laundry, doing dishes, vacuuming. If I didn't have inside housework, I did the outside housework, the mowing the lawn, that kind of stuff. And then when those weren't going on, at one point I had 6 specialists that I had to see once every 6 months for both of my kids. So I would have to schedule those doctor's appointments. And then on top of those, I'd have to schedule pediatrician appointments and just all the medical stuff related to it. And usually I'd have about an hour or so after everything was done where I could kind of sit and kind of regain my thoughts. And then about an hour before, I would go ahead and get my kids' stuff ready for when they got home. And like if it was a night that I would give them a bath on, I'd bring them both in. I'd get them kind of on the couch so they could relax. I'd get one into the bath. I'd bring them out, get them dressed. I'd go get the other one in bath, and I'd start dinner. And I mean, it was just one thing right after another. 80 to 90% of the time is what it was, is kind of a typical day. And the weekends, even though they didn't go to school, it was almost the same.
Now, you mentioned the Lyft bus that would come directly to your house. Was getting accommodations like in the home, outside of the home, was that relatively easy, or did you kind of have to go through a lot of hoops to get things that you could function in that day-to-day life?
The school bus, no, because in the county that I live in, at least on the elementary and middle school levels, the kids go to the school that best meets their need with the program there. Now, when they go to high school, you go to the high school you're districted for, because all of our high schools have multiple rooms. So you've got kind of multiple different specialties at a high school, whereas elementary schools, it just depends on what the big issue was for your child and what school best met that need. So that wasn't an issue. That was pretty simple. As for the equipment, it depended on what the equipment was. Like when we started realizing that my son was very susceptible to respiratory related illnesses, his pulmonologist was very proactive. And so through her, it was reasonably easy because she fought for every piece of equipment that he needed. And when I had him in his room, I had 5 different respiratory machines in here that the moment I heard him cough, the cough that I always knew was him getting sick, I would go through my protocol and I would start with from the first machine all the way down to the last machine. And I would do that literally every 4 hours. And so that stuff wasn't, but like stuff on our end wasn't difficult, but I don't know about other states, but in the state of Georgia, there are a lot of hoops you have to go through to get something approved. And you have to, like, for example, my daughter wears AFOs, which are the kind of hard braces that go on the ankle and the leg all the way up to like the knee. It gives them support. Even though I know right now my daughter's about to outgrow them and I know she needs more, because we're on Georgia Medicaid, I am required to go to her pediatrician, make an appointment, have the pediatrician go, "Why are you here?" And I would say, "Georgia Medicaid." She would go, "Okay." And she would say, "What do you need?" I said, "Look at her braces and tell me if she needs them." And it was obvious. She would go, Yes, she needs braces. I said, well, can you send a prescription to the equipment company that we've got over here and let them know that you've seen them so that they can then, because what will happen is in the state of Georgia, if we don't see the pediatrician within 6 months of the prescription, then Georgia Medicaid is not going to pay for them, even though Georgia Medicaid has a record for the last 16 years stating that she has needed them every 6 months for 16 years. But they will not pay for them unless we go through these specific and ridiculous steps. So it's more those kind of things that make it difficult. Once we get through them, getting the actual stuff is not hard.
Gotta love the medical systems. You know, they gotta
Yep.
make it easy, but after so many years under your belt, you know what you're getting into.
Yep.
So then, you know, obviously things sort of took a change when your son passed away and you decided to start this blog.
Mhm.
So are you willing to share kind of just like whatever you're willing to share about those moments and how your life changed?
Yeah, I will talk about anything related to it. It's I still have my moments about it. Grief will never go away, but it's certainly easier to talk about now than say the first 6 months, the first year kind of time frame. um, uh, the it's a pretty drawn out experience, but the easy way to explain it was about 3 days before the day that he passed. He got what we thought was a 24-hour virus. He had had one many times in his life. Um, he didn't really sleep that night. At the time, I was a stay-at-home parent, so I texted his teacher and said, "Hey, Zachary's not feeling well," because he was in a self-contained classroom, and if he was sick, like contagious, I didn't want to spread it to another kid with a medical issue. So I texted her and said, "Hey, Zach's not feeling well. He's not going to be in class today. I'll let you know if I'm going to keep him out tomorrow." Okay, fine. Didn't really sleep well that night. The next day, he absolutely refused to take a nap for some reason. I kept telling him, I'm just like, buddy, I'm not doing anything. You're not going to miss anything. You can close your eyes. I know you're tired. You didn't sleep well last night. Refused to take a nap. That night we put him down. He got really quiet. I just figured he crashed hard because he hadn't slept the night before and he didn't really sleep all day. So I figured he was just exhausted. Again, I texted his teacher, said, "Hey, I'm going to keep him out again tomorrow." I said, which at that point it was, that would have been a Friday, the day that I kept him out. I said, so I can butt into the weekend and then I'll have 2 more days and hopefully he'll be over whatever this is so we can come back to school on Monday. Well, that Friday morning I got him up and he was active but not his normal self. And when I went to the right side of him, he had a dark green streak coming out of his mouth. And the only thing dark green in your system that could come out of your mouth is bile. And bile coming out of anywhere is not a good sign at all. So I got him out on the living room floor. I went through my mental medical protocol. Nothing was working. And it was honestly a gut reaction. I looked at my wife and said, something's not right. I don't recognize these symptoms. I'm going to take him to the hospital. And at that point, we were both under the belief that, yeah, he's sick. They're going to admit him. They'll give him medications. We'll be here for several days. We'll come home in a week, is honestly what our thought process was. I can look back on it now on the, like, where I live in Atlanta is 65 miles south of the children's hospital that he went to frequently. Now that sounds like a long distance, but in Atlanta, it takes 30 minutes to get 30 minutes from anywhere. That's how big Atlanta is. So me driving 65 miles is nothing. I mean, I've done it so many times I could close my eyes and do it. I can look back now and realize on the way up there that he was fading in, and I thought he was going to sleep and waking back up, but he was actually fading in and out of consciousness, and I didn't realize it at the time. Get him up into the hospital, get him up to the ER, and I skipped the line that's there, and the security guard comes over to me as if to like yell at me to say, you need to get in line. And I look at him without skipping a beat and go, I don't think he's breathing. I need help. And so he immediately whistles at the nurse. Now, I've been in this hospital 100 times, and this is the first time I've literally gone in a full run back into the ER into a trauma room. So I get in the trauma room. I instinctively get him out of his chair. I put him on the table that's there, and I back out of the way in hopes that they will let me stay in the room because he's nonverbal and he can't tell them outside the fact of he's not talking. The state of his health at that point, he wouldn't be talking anyways. So there's another trauma room next door that's open, and I back out in there. They let me stay there. About 30 people come like ants on an anthill, come out of nowhere and come in, and they just start things. Head ER doc comes to me and goes, down to the minute to your best of your recollection, how long has he been in this state? And I tell her, and she goes, okay. She barks orders at him. She comes back and she goes, explain to me the scenario in which, what made you think to bring him up here? And so I tell her everything. Now, mind you, while we're doing this, they immediately start CPR on him. Like at that point, it had been about 20 minutes and they had been doing 20 continuous minutes of CPR on him. And I'm watching it, and in my head, I'm thinking I'm not thinking he's going to pass away at this point. So they continue to do it, and then they get the paddles out. Well, in the old medical shows, they're the big, like plastic looking things with the metal pads, and they put the gel on, they rub them together, and they yell clear. Well, that's not how they do it anymore. Now it's just basically pads they put on you, and it almost looks like a slender Xbox that they sit on the side. And they yell clear and they hit the button. And like medical TV shows, he literally raises off the table. And so I see it. And now when I'm in the hospital before, because he's always got respiratory issues, I'm watching his respiratory rate at this point to see if it changes, because, I can see his oxygen rate. It's okay at this point, and his pulse is kind of okay. Well, they shock him, and it literally bleeps one time and goes right back to what it's doing. And in my head at that point, even though they hadn't pronounced him, I go, he's not coming back. And so they continue for another 45 continuous minutes, CPR, periodically giving him, trying to shock him back to life, and nothing's working. So they finally pronounce him. I walk off into the room and kind of have a moment for just a second, as anyone can imagine. And then I have to call my wife, his mother, who at that point thinks I'm just going to get admitted to tell her that her son's dead on a table. I'll never forget the sound she made when I told her. I said, call your parents. You don't need to drive. Have them drive you up here. This is where we are. I then had to call my mother, his grandmother. I'll never forget the sound that she made when I told her. And then I later found out my mother said, when you called that day, she said, you were eerily calm, like nothing was bothering you. And I said, well, in that moment, I had to compartmentalize because there were things I needed to know. And me being a blubbering mess, if you will, was not going to get it resolved. And so I started talking to the care team, and I've rattled off about 8 or 9 questions because I wanted to get him home, so to speak, to the funeral home so we could start that process. So from the Wednesday that we saw it to the Friday morning that they pronounced him, it was less than 36 hours that everything happened. And some people might think that's a long time, but it goes by like that. So it was quick. It was sudden. It was unexpected. It was nothing we ever saw coming. So that's kind of how that day went. As for the grief journey, I'd been seeing a counselor, and her suggestion when I told her when I was going, I'd literally just stopped seeing her like 2 weeks before because the kind of the grief season I was going through had kind of run its course. And so when all this happened, I immediately called her up and said, I need an emergency meeting. I've got something I need to tell you. And so I started seeing her again. And a couple of sessions in, she goes, have you ever thought about journaling? And the irony of all of that is I went, I don't know if that's my thing. I don't know if I'm a real good writer or anything. And she said, well, put it on the back burner. You can come back to it at any time. So that idea sat literally on my side table for 2 months. And one day I was having a moment with, just dealing with the loss of my son. And I got on a Word document and in letter form, like I wrote the date, Dear Zachary, and I just wrote in letter form to him. And it was raw. It was open. It was unfiltered. It was not sugar coated, nothing. Like if in the moment I felt like I needed to be expletive laden, that's how I wrote it. And so I did that, and I did that for day after day after day. And I was a part of a grief group, and the admin I got to know really well. And one day I go, do you mind if I post one of my journal entries? She looked at me and went, no, please do. We don't get a whole lot of men in here that express their emotion, especially related to grief. And so I posted it, and I almost immediately got a massive response. Like I had mothers and wives saying, I've never told anybody exactly how I felt on the inside. And you have just written a letter that explains exactly how I feel word for word. And I have never told anybody. And I said, well, I appreciate it. I said, these words are inspired by my son. And I said, I'm glad I could write something that kind of resonated with you. And every time I would post it, I would kind of get these responses. So finally, one day, people were suggesting, have you ever thought about writing a book, doing a podcast? And those two things, I said, I don't know if I have the brain power right now to do those. And so someone finally came up and said, well, have you ever thought about just doing a Facebook page? She said, at least you could like copy and paste all these and you could kind of share it to the world that way. And you could get kind of a feel for what people think of them. And so I did that, and it just evolved from there. It was initially just for men, just because I saw so few men feeling like they could be vulnerable enough to share. And I wanted to have a space where they could come in without judgment, I hate to say it, without their wives judging them on what they were sharing, to be able to come in and say, hey, these are what my feelings for losing my son, my daughter, whatever. And so I did that for a while, but then I decided, well, I'm going to open it up to everybody that's grieving, whether you've lost a parent, a child, a sibling, something like that. And that went good for a little while. And then it finally evolved to, I've opened it up to them. Now I've decided I'm going to open it up to, well, it was always kind of open to women, but specifically women. And here's what I mean by that. I wanted to be able to give women a place where they could ask me as a man how men grieve, how we deal with grief, and I could give them tips of how I think that they could help the males in their life with their grief. Because through this whole journey, I constantly got questions from women, something to the effect of, we lost our son or daughter, 6 months ago, a year ago. My husband has not opened up. What can I do to get him to open up? And then I would go, well, I can't guarantee that these are going to work, but I literally have a list of 10 things. I'm just like, here's a list of 10 things I think you can look at and kind of cater to what your needs are that I think will help. And so that's where all of this evolved to. And as of yesterday, in 8 months, I now have over 1,000 followers.
So this kind of started with, your grief counselor throwing an idea at you that originally weren't going to take. What kind of got you to first even see that counselor? Since, your experience has been, as you started to share with others, like men aren't doing this. So what kind of started your journey to say, like, I should be doing this, or like, I need this for myself?
Well, I've always been a proponent of counseling. Before my son passed, I'd literally seen this same counselor for about a year. I had some other issues that I'd been dealing with for a very long time that it was one of those things, it's kind of a man response, but I was finally so fed up with dealing with them that I was just like, I have to, somebody. And so I had seen her for probably a year before that. And so I knew her. We meshed really well together. Finding a counselor is like people finding a good mechanic. You gotta have someone you trust and someone that you think they know what they're doing, that kind of thing. And so I had a lot of trust in her. And you know, my first kind of trepidation about journaling publicly was when I taught as a PE teacher. I would have to give correspondence to the whole school when I would do things like running clubs and field days, that kind of thing. My principal absolutely hated my writing, like with a passion. She would go over it and I would get it back and it would be blood red from all the corrections she had on it. And so I was kind of initially in my head going, well, I don't know how well I can write, because the last time I really wrote, I just got crucified on it. And so I just started writing. And I'm one of those people that sometimes a thought will come into my head and I'll just run with it. And so and honestly, when I first did that first like Word document letter, I saved it, and my counselor she's just like, even if you only do this for yourself, it's for you to get it out. And she said, you could print it out. And she said, if you don't want to share with anybody, you can throw it in the fire and burn it. And then no one will ever have to see it. And so that was kind of the mentality I had in the beginning. And it was just, you know, after about 2 or 3 months, I started thinking, because I had a really hard time writing the obituary for my 15-year-old son. And and in fact, that's one of the letters I write about, saying, how does one write a letter for a 15-year-old child? And I said, and it's relegated to 3 or 4 paragraphs to explain his entire life is what it's relegated to. And so that got me to thinking. I was just like, well, I need to do something, even if it's indirectly, to help create a legacy for my son. And so that's really what kind of got the ball rolling. And so when I thought that, I thought, well, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to have to share it, and I'm going to have to bite my lip at what people think about it, especially if it's not the response I think it's going to be. And when I got that immediate response, and I got it every letter for 4 or 5 letters in a row, after about that 5th letter in my brain, I went, well, maybe I have something here, because I continually get this same pattern response of, this is great, keep writing, keep doing what you're doing, kind of thing. And so it was all of that was kind of the culmination of how all of this started. So yes, it was initially kind of brought on by my counselor, but it was kind of how things evolved from there. She was the one that got the ball rolling, but I was kind of the one that, even though it was rolling, I kind of pushed it over the hill, and then it really started rolling.
Yes. And so then, as you're continuing to share things on your Facebook page, you have also now gotten back into education. So what was like the decision process there to kind of leave the stay-at-home parent life?
One, just because with or without the ADD I was diagnosed with, I'm one of those people that I will overthink everything. Like I have had insomnia, sleeping issues for 20 years, because I'll get a thought in my head and it'll just swirl. And my thought was, if I stay at home and I have all this free time, I'm just going to think about it. And so like a lot of people, especially men, the reason why men don't really, the only way to deal with grief is to grieve. And the way men combat that is, a lot of men will just dive headfirst into work and they'll avoid it. And so I wasn't trying to avoid it per se, but I just didn't want to sit there and just openly deal with it constantly all day long. I would deal with it, and I have dealt with it, but it was more to do something else outside of bringing a paycheck into the house. Now, even though I'm back in education, I'm not teaching per se. And what I mean by that is, all teachers have to be certified. And I've been out so long that my certifications for physical education have lapsed. And so for me to go back and get recertified, not only do I have to take 2 different certification tests for it, I have to go and pick up the latest classes on my subject area before I can do that. And so I'm back into school, but I'm a teacher's aide or a paraprofessional right now. And I did that because my thought was if I ever decide to get recertified, at least my foot's in the door and a principal knows me, they know my style. And so maybe it'll be easier for me to get back into the school system that way is the reason why I did that.
So do you think, you may at some point want to get recertified?
I don't know. Right now, I'm really, I'm working in education, but this with on my side of all this grief stuff, outside of doing your podcast and all that, some things have really blown up about it. And until I can do something where I feel like I can make some income at it, I've really considered making a career change, trying to do all this grief stuff and motivation and that stuff full time. I mean, at least on the financial end, it hasn't worked out quite yet, but I mean, I'm only 8 months into it kind of thing. So the goal for me would be, I would love to do all of this full time, maybe be a paid speaker, that kind of thing to be able to make income at it. Because I've had a lot of people say, I really like your writing. I like your style. I like this. And, I've had a lot of people say, the thing you're good at is you take complex ideas and emotions and you make analogies that are simplistic enough for me to understand. And my thought has always been, I said, well, if I can explain it to you like a kindergartner could understand it, then everybody can understand it. And so I'm really trying to, while I work in education, I'm really trying to get this ball rolling on maybe the motivational grief side.
And do you think you might ever take a stab at writing a book?
Funny you should say that. I actually talked to a publishing company today. Not so much a book right now, but I'm working on getting some material, some hard copy material out, not only to promote me, my page, and all of my social media, but to also help collaborate with some of the other big names in the grief community that I'm good friends with, to promote myself to try to get me to that next step. And if I do get to that point, I'll certainly consider. I didn't do it in the beginning because I never felt like I had enough material. But now, at almost 2.5 years out, I've got a 2-inch binder by my feet that is just full of stuff. So at this point, I think I've got enough so that I can pick and choose per se, versus having to just use everything because that's all I've got.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And so you mentioned how, originally when you were sharing your grief, it was very men focused because you were hearing about how, men aren't sharing their grief. And then you opened it up to women, able to ask questions and look for advice. Through all of this, has your wife kind of ever questioned your grief journey? Or has it just kind of been like, this is how Jason is, and I wouldn't expect anything different?
My wife and I have never been the traditional sense of a married couple. Like, for example, I was the stay-at-home parent. She liked being out in the workforce, and I said, as long my response was always, as long as one of us brings in enough to be able to sustain whatever life we have, I don't care who does it. If you want me to do it, fine. If you want to do it, fine. I'll stay at home. I have no problem with that. As for the grief, she's typically a little more quiet and unto herself about it. I am more open about it. Now, will I do it out in public? Not so much, but like in the house. I would say for that first 4 years, if it wasn't a couple of times a day, it was at least several times a week. Like, we'd sit on our reclining couch, and I'd be on my computer, and I'd watch a reel or something, and it would just hit me like a Mack truck, and I'd just be bawling. Just my we both had our connection with our son, but even my wife would tell you that my connection with my son was vastly different than hers, just because I was the stay-at-home parent. I did all the physical medical stuff. I did all the doctor stays. When he went into the hospital, I went there with him. I was when he got admitted, I was there the entire time he was there. I came home with him. Like of all of the days in his life that he was at the hospital, I think I missed 3 days in all of the days he was ever at the hospital. I was always there. And so her comment about all of this grief stuff is, in fact, she said it tonight. She was just like, this podcasting you've done and this page, she said, it has helped you immensely. And she said, even through what you're dealing with, whether you know it or not, you're helping people out there, if anything, by the example that you're giving. And so she's been very supportive of it. And, whatever I want to do in it, whatever direction I want to go into it. I mean, there's probably 3 or 4 different directions I'm thinking in my head. Now, will any of them work out? I mean, I don't know, but I'm going to at least try them.
Yeah, no, it's good to hear, the support you give each other as, various relationships show, sort of non-traditional ways, and making sure that, you can, have emotions and share your journey.
Mm.
Now, before I start to wrap things up, is there anything else that you would like to share with the listeners today?
One thing for men and one thing for women. I would say for those of you that would like to go to my page, Letters to Zachary, it's an open place. Don't feel like you've got to hide anything. You can open up as much or as little as you want. I'm very much the proponent. If someone were to come in there and to chastise you for how you are feeling in an experience that they've never dealt with before, I said, I will deal with them, because I want men to know that even if someone may come in there and say something, if that person is going to do that, I'll remove them, because it means more to me that you have trust in me, that it'll be a place where you don't feel like it will be brought back at you, versus having a ton of followers, even if I lose followers because of that. On the other side, for women, the hardest thing and this is by no means being anti-woman or anything, but the way I may say it may appear that way. The hardest thing I've had that I'm still overcoming when it goes to trying to explain to women how men deal with their emotion is this. All the time I get women coming up to me saying, well, my husband's not opening up. What do I need to do? And I'll tell them, and there's a good percentage of them that when I tell them, they'll go, well, no, that's not how it is at all. And I'll look at them and go, I've been a man all my life. I've dealt with emotion all my life. I'm a pretty good authority on how men deal with emotion. Am I like every man? No, I'm not, but I've got a pretty good idea about it. So if you're just hoping for me to regurgitate your words in a male voice, I'm not the person to ask. I'm really not. And there's been a couple here and there that I've had to be real with them, and I've had to say, look, I don't know how you are with your husband. However, you have to push ego to the side. If you cannot push your ego to the side and admit that you are not right in your belief system and how to deal with your husband, you will never connect with your husband. I can tell you that 100%. Because even though it's portrayed that most men, like in TV shows, are dumb and ignorant, we pick up on a lot of things. And I said, if we feel like we're not being heard, you're only using your opinion, you're not taking us seriously, I said, you're going to get almost like baseball. You're going to get 3 strikes and you're out. And I said, once you hit that 3rd strike, I said, he's not going to open up to you again. I said, you got a couple of chances. And I said, I'm not trying to be mean to you. I'm telling you what it is. I said, you got to put your ego to the side, just like we do when we're talking to you at times. I said, if you can't do that, you're not going to get anywhere. And so that's probably my biggest message lately, at least to the female side of things. Now, I do have a lot of women out there that are great, that'll go, "Hey, that's a good idea. I'm going to try that." And I would say, "Well, I said, when you try that, let me know if it worked or it didn't work, and then I'll see if I can kind of tweak it to see if it'll help you." And so, I mean, that's really a small portion of the ones that just don't want to listen, but it's something I feel like I have to put in there because I've been getting at a little more and a little more lately.
Yeah, no, it's important to, share what's truthful to you and, try to connect and, explain, different ways of thought. And so I appreciate you sharing that here at the end. Now, at the end of all my episodes, I do ask my guests a random question. So my question for you today is, what is the best kind of sandwich?
Well, that would beg the question if one believes that a hot dog is a sandwich. And I know there's been a tremendous amount of debate online about it. And for the record, I do not think a hot dog is a sandwich. The best kind of sandwich. The best general kind of sandwich, like on the go, would be probably peanut butter and jelly. It's easy, it's fast, it's classic. If I were like ordering one, oh Lord, I'm a big fan of Jersey Mike's. Just about anything there. So any sandwich I can get at Jersey Mike's, just about.
All right, that brings this episode to a close. So, of course, if you would like to connect with Jason and, see more about what he's sharing on his grief journey, or if you want to connect about your grief journey, his Facebook page will, of course, be in the description. He is also on TikTok. That link will be there as well. And he's also, of course, on other social media. So you can get to those social medias from those pages. Feel free to connect with him wherever you best desire. Of course, if you would like to connect with the podcast, our website is in the description. That brings you to our social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. It also brings you, of course, to all of our past episodes and all of that good information there, past guests, social media, resources, all of those good things. So feel free to check that out. If you would like to share your story and be a guest on the podcast, my email is in the description. That is always the best way to reach me. And if you would like to donate to the podcast monetarily, there is a link to do that as well. So thank you so much, Jason, for spending time with me today, and to my listeners for taking the time out of your day to hear a new story. Until next time, bye.
Thank you and God bless.